Well, all right, Ashley Jameson, welcome to the program.
Yes, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we got to have you as a guest here. We had a brief connection at the Sexual Integrity Leadership Summit back in April of this year, and it was so good to see you there and the whole Pure Desire team. And so, why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about the work that you do with Pure Desire and maybe even a little bit about the ministry?
Yeah, so I am the Associate Director of Women's Groups at Pure Desire, which means I help churches, organizations, individuals, um, anybody basically who wants to start a group or be part of a group. Just needs help with some next steps. I work with them and get them going. So we have all kinds of resources. We have a sexual integrity video course that's just the foundation of what we do and foundation to what sexual health looks like and what it takes to get there. We're biblically based and scientifically informed, so we couple those things together to show Christians how the way God designed our body lines up with some science, and we can use those things together to get ourselves out of these ruts. We offer online groups for people who either have experienced betrayal, male or female, from a spouse who struggles sexually or with pornography. We also have groups for the person who struggles with love, sex, or relationship, pornography, anything that would cause them to want to address those behaviors and strive for sexual health. So we offer both for men and women online. And then again, we partner with churches to run their own groups. We have a pretty big clinical team. So we do a lot of online counseling for couples, which is unique because couples will be paired with a male and female clinician. And they'll be working with both of them simultaneously. We do conferences and, put out books, kind of just do a little bit of everything. Uh, we
Yeah.
just we really want to help people who have been impacted by sexual brokenness.
Yeah. Now at the leadership summit, you did a one of the breakout sessions, and you were dealing with this topic of racism and sexual brokenness, and that's really the reason I wanted to have you on to the program. Is I believe
Mhm.
there certainly need to be more voices in this space, but I think yours is a powerful voice to bring to this, and so by way of introduction to that big topic, could you share with our audience just some of your story, your own story, and your own journey as it pertains to this kind of intersection of racism and sexual brokenness?
Yeah. So I have been with Pure Desire for 6.5 years on staff, and I was brought in because I found Pure Desire because my husband had an addiction, and so I came in on the betrayal side. I quickly realized that that addict material pertained to me, and I'm thinking, I'm the one hurt here. Why does this pertain to me? And so I started really digging into my own past, and that's what helped kind of launch some of our newer resources. And I looked back at my history and really started looking at, how did I get here? How do I keep ending up with addicts, two addict husbands? How did I end up with an eating disorder and sexual acting out and all of this crazy behavior when I've loved the Lord with my whole heart as much as I could since I was a little kid? And on the surface, I looked like it had it all together, but I had all these issues that I had either struggled with in the past or were currently struggling with. And so when I look back at my life, I realized it started at a really young age and how I learned how to attach to people and how I saw myself, and my identity was really shattered and corroded by the world and the people around me. I grew up in a community that was white and was only one of the only Black girls in my community. And so I was teased a lot,
Mm,
called all the names, told, by some of the popular kids that they wanted to hang me from their family tree, and just really horrible stuff.
mm,
Boys would throw things at me like a ball with a swastika on it. And so I learned at a young age to just blend in as much as I could, play nice, people please. I didn't want to do anything to ripple the waters, so to speak. Straighten my hair, try to look as white as I can, cover up in sunscreen so I don't get any darker. And it really just hindered my ability to feel confident in myself and who God created me to be. And then on top of that, my mom had a really traumatic past. She's 74 now, so she really went through it being a full Black dark lady in some hard times. And so she didn't want me to have that same experience. And so from home, I would hear, don't look so Black.
Mm,
Don't wear your hair so Black. Don't act so Black. Marry a white person so your life will be easier and your kids will be lighter. Or, these are the things I'd hear from my family side. And then from the school side, from the white people, I'm hearing it's bad to be Black. It's bad to be Black. And so I just really felt lost. So then, even at the age of 15, I ended up getting raped as a virgin
mm,
by an older white guy, not like old, but older than me, 5 years older than me. And it caused this conflict in me of like, oh, I'm never going to be good enough for a Christian husband now, because I hear at church, if you have sex before marriage, you've lost your purity,
mm,
and I'm never going to be able to have that. And so right then I lowered my standard of what kind of guy I would even be able to have as a Christian woman. Um, and then at the same time, I finally felt pursued and beautiful by somebody, even though it was in the form of rape. And so it really confused me as a teenager. And I would go back and forth between church and partying, because at church, I loved what I was experiencing and feeling on fire for Jesus and doing what I felt called to do and leading little kids and teaching. And then in the world, I felt like, well, this is who I really am. And they know who I really am. I had secrets in church, which made me feel like I couldn't be there very long. And so I ended up getting pregnant my senior year with twin boys and marrying their dad, even though that was toxic, because again, I'm like, well, I'm never going to have a Christian husband
mm.
because I'm not pure. So I should marry their dad. And that was a very hard relationship. And then ended up divorcing their dad and, finding my new husband who is a Christian. And I thought, oh, this is my second chance. And so that's being married to him and then discovering his pornography addiction led me to Pure Desire. And then once I started working at Pure Desire, that's where so much of my past started really making sense to me, of how much shame I was carrying. The more I dug in, the more I spoke to people, the more I processed my own story, I realized there's a whole avenue of women and men who, yes, were sexually broken or were pursuing love and relationships in a very unhealthy way, but a lot of it is our story and what was either put on us or the trauma we're feeling. And so I just have this heart to share a little piece of what
Mhm.
maybe the Black community goes through, that it's another level of complex chronic trauma that just keeps happening and keeps getting aggravated, at least in my life. And it does contribute to the way we act in relationships. And if we don't have space and grace to be able to talk about those things, especially in a church, without it creating anger in somebody or a heated political discussion, then we're going to stay stuck in our brokenness, because we know how important it is to process our story and our pain in order to find healing in relationships and sexual brokenness.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Uh, my heart is just torn for the little girl you, because I think, that's not the weight that a little girl should ever have to carry. Because it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, you carried twice the weight that your white friends did, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, what kind of response have you gotten from others in both the Black and white community when you do share your story?
hmm This can be, well, one, the Black community, which I have a really large Black family. Um, it's People are shocked that we're still experiencing this, and
Mm,
and I I want to speak out for Black people who are feeling what I feel, but I don't want to speak out for everybody and say that this is everybody's experience. Because
right.
if you talk to some of my Black family in the East Side or the South Side of the country, they may have a different experience because they grew up in a Black community. So they may have not experienced as much racism or even connected it to the way they act sexually. It's going to look different for me, who grew up in Eastern Washington and now in Idaho. So, but overall, the more and more I talk to people, it's just like it was when I started talking about my sexual struggles and my betrayal experience. People have not been talking about it. And so
Hmm.
the more and more I've talked about it the last couple of years, the more I hear, Well, I'm so glad that that you're talking about it now, because that happened to me and I never told anybody, and I always thought I was dirty, and I always thought I was less than. And so it's like we're just starting sometimes to feel free enough to talk about it. Um Unfortunately, some of my white side of my family has really struggled with it because of the political tensions that are going on in these
Mhm.
last couple of years. And you're either on this side of the fence or this side. There's no room to say I relate with a lot of this, but I can also understand this. There's none of that happening. And so even some of my white friends and family have said, people just need to get over it. The past is the past. And then I'm trying to be a voice of reason, saying my daughter is 12 and is still experiencing racism all the way up till last week, when she was told her skin looks like poop and she was ugly. And
Mm.
I'm like, so I it's people just don't believe that it's happening on the level that it is still happening.
Yeah. And that's why I really appreciate what you're saying and what you said a little bit earlier about the need for us to be able to share our stories and that those stories are personal and unique. And
Hmm.
I think that needs to be heard because I think you're right. We can kind of just lump everybody into a single category. Like, you know what? I even just misspoke 3 minutes ago when I said black community, white community, almost as if to say everybody in the white community is the same and everybody in the black community is the same. That's not true, right? So I love the fact that you're saying that our stories are personal, our stories are unique, but also our stories need to be heard. As we
Hmm.
think about this, one of the things that made me that I thought about in terms of this idea of racism and sexual brokenness is we talk about sexual brokenness, we put that word brokenness with it, right? The idea that there is something with our sexuality and our sometimes even our bodies, there's a brokenness there. Our thoughts about how we think about sex and God's design and all that, there's a brokenness there. But racism is a brokenness too, right? There's a brokenness there
Hmm.
around how we view one another and our identities and those kind of things. Can you talk about where you see some similarities in these brokenness, the racism and the sexual brokenness, and maybe where you see some distinctions among that?
Yeah, so similarities, when I was really thinking about this, w- when we in this community of leaders who are fighting for sexual health for people and offering hope, we understand that the family unit is so important to how we behave and how we act. And so when I was doing research on this and even just looking at my own family history, the numbers are so staggering on dads missing out of the home with black families, dads being incarcerated at a higher rate with black families, young black kids being arrested at a higher percentage for prostitution. When we're not the majority of the race in this country,
Mhm.
but we're the highest race to be, experiencing these things, broken homes. And so I think at the core, that plays a part. The family unit, which God created to be so strong and to have this, symbiotic effect on kids, that we have this family unit for a reason. We have a nurturer, we have a somebody who teaches us how to provide and how to fight and protect our family. And when that's shattered, which I feel like is Satan's game,
Mhm.
to shatter the home, it causes the kids to grasp for relationship, acceptance, and love. And I see that same thing in sexual brokenness. That when one of the parents is struggling and it causes that parent to withdraw, act out in anger, abandon the family, the same effect is happening. The kids are saying, what's wrong with my family? Why wasn't I worth it for my dad to stay? um, why is dad angry all the time? Why is mom angry all the time? Why is she lashing out? And so if the family unit can be broken, it's going to cause problems that are generational,
Mm.
um, because
Yeah.
these kids are growing up without that healthy structure.
What are some of the uniquenesses or differences that you see as it pertains to racism and sexual brokenness?
Uh, One of the main differences, and like I said, everybody's story is unique, but I think
Yeah.
one thing that is common to all of the Black community is that this has been a historical, generational Black people only really problem, that this has been this huge systemic problem that's caused chronic trauma. And whether you meet some people that say, oh, I'm not affected by that or whatnot, it still affects a whole people group. And
Hmm.
I think that is unique because sexual sin has entered into everybody circle in the United States. But what the Black race has gone through in the United States, and still to some degrees varying now, is unique to the
Yeah.
Black race. And so if we don't allow, allow room to feel uncomfortable and let our Black men and women come forward and be able to process these things and wrestle these things and maybe even feel angry or betrayed or whatever it is they're feeling, then I truly believe that we can't get to the wholeness of who they are, supposed to be in healthy sexuality.
Hmm.
Because we know that to live sexually healthy, we have to understand our story, we have to understand our pain, we have to understand our traumas, understand why we do what we do, and we have to allow people to have room to talk about that. And I've seen in some Bible study circles or small group studies, it's like, okay, we're only here to do the study, which I get because my group's a little bit run like that. But you're not allowed to bring out in outside resources. We're not allowed to talk about anything political. And so then when you have somebody like me whose experience with racism is directly tied with how I act in relationships, and I'm not allowed to talk about anything racial, or maybe something happened and it's triggered me and I'm feeling insecure or I'm in trauma, then we hinder the healing a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of the things as you were saying that I was thinking about, one of the things I've learned being in this space of ministry for many years, almost 20 years now, is as we've had many, Black men that have come through our Gateway to Freedom workshop, it was so eye-opening to me because I realized, you know what? In my own story of recovery, I had, not that my sexual addiction was my only issue, but that was my singular focus when I got into recovery. I didn't
Mhm.
have an additional burden of racism that was part of my
Right.
own story. So there's a huge, I think, ignorance gap for a guy like me, a white male in America.
Mhm.
Can you help us close that gap? Where do you see the need for more education? What are the key things that you would say, hey, this would really help to start closing that gap of ignorance, where we can actually come together and have productive conversations. We can actually have healing conversations. There can actually maybe be real reconciliation between these separate groups
I think
around
one of
this issue
the
of
big
sexual brokenness.
Yes, yeah, completely. Um, I think one of the biggest things we can do is exactly what you're doing right now, and exactly what Daniel did, inviting me to speak at the Sexual Integrity Leadership Summit. When white people, or people who, I know this is a trigger word, may have privilege, of their history and their upbringing and education or whatever it may be. Anybody, regardless of what issue we're talking about, anybody who seemingly in the more privileged state, if they can be the ones to start opening the doors and being kind of an advocate, that's huge. I mean, it makes a huge impact than, me going around saying, hey, I want to talk to you about racism and sexual brokenness and what I've experienced. But when you have somebody who's already in a position of leadership and influence, who maybe that's not part of their story, and they, bring in a guest to share a testimony and share some work that God's done through their life and their story and experience, it's just, that storytelling is so powerful. And we see that in the sexual integrity, circle that we run in, that when you allow somebody to come be vulnerable and share their story, especially from a position of leadership or a pulpit or a platform, that people say, okay, if that person can be brave and talk about it, then I can too. And I can't tell you how many times I've been at a conference and I've just sprinkled in a little, before things got really hot a couple years ago, sprinkled in a little something about my experience with racism growing up. And I would have elderly Black men come up to me and say, I so appreciate somebody in a Christian organization saying something about racism and how it affected them. And I just was so touched. It actually encouraged me to want to be brave and continue to have that be part of my story and my testimony out loud, because I'm seeing it impact people who say we don't hear enough of this, especially from Christian organizations, especially from predominantly white organizations. And
Hmm.
so just allowing space. There's great there's great resources out there for small groups, like Be the Bridge and Latasha Morrison's group organization, but storytelling, testimonies, podcasts, and then just teaching our leaders, that people that we maybe train up or have influence over, that we want them to cultivate environments where people can talk about their racial experiences without shutting it down, and teach them how to navigate that too if it starts feeling tense. It would be like anything else in our sexual groups that causes a trigger. You may have a woman in there and another woman says, I am the affair partner, while another one's processing her betrayal. We as leaders need to be trained how to handle that, but we don't shut either one down because they both have their experience and they both have their story. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to ask you to maybe kind of speak to two separate people here. One is the person out there that shares your experience to some degree. So, a black man or woman that is trying to process their own history of sexual brokenness in the context of the reality that they've also faced racism and all of that. What would you want to say to that person to give them a sense of hope and courage to step deeper into that healing journey?
Yeah, for that person, I would say, with what we do in sexual health, the numbers are really lopsided. We walk through a predominantly black community and we enter the event center that we're doing a conference, and it's a sea of white faces with a couple sprinkled, minority faces. And I would say that our stories do not have to be wasted. Revelation 12:11, that we overcome by the word of
Hmm.
our testimony and the blood of Lamb. We have what Christ has done for us on the cross, and our testimonies are so powerful for breaking strongholds, not only for us, but our kids, but for the people out there that need to hear it. And sometimes just simply being vulnerable and honest in your story and sharing it, starting a group, whatever it may be, whatever you're feeling called to do, but using something that's unique to you that feels maybe shameful or scary or whatever it may be. I would just say continue to fight for reconciliation and for more understanding, because the more we step out and share our story, the more it's going to offer a hand up for somebody else who needed to hear our story. And I just don't think there's anything more powerful than continuing to share your story and how you found hope and freedom, because people need to hear that they're not alone.
Yeah. And then what would you say to the white man or woman out there that is either just ignorant or blind to this reality um, of racism and sexual brokenness? And I'm not necessarily talking. Uh, I'm going to delineate between the white man or woman that is just ignorant or blind and the person that's just combative, or they are just uh, in the
Hmm.
stronghold of racism. You know what I mean? I'm talking to the
Right.
person that's open. What would you want to say to them? Because to be honest with you, in my sphere within the church and even within my community, I believe that's the vast majority of the white men and women that I know. There's just an ignorance
Hmm.
or a blindness to the realities that we're talking about here. So what would you want to say to them to help them cross that bridge and be more either involved or more open to what this reconciliation and healing can look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best way that you can do that is to start. I mean, you're not going to go on, interracialfriends.com, but start trying to allow your start trying to allow yourself to have different people in your circle. Because one thing I hear so often is, oh, we brought that person on as a volunteer, we hired that person because they really just clicked. We all just clicked together, there's a chemistry. Sometimes it's nice if that person is still a believer and loves the Lord and fits with the values of the organization, that you don't click exactly, because it stretches you to think outside of your norm. And so just by me being the only woman on the executive team at Pure Desire, I'm automatically going to have a different perspective on 50% of the issues, if not more, than the guys on the team. I'm going to go,
Hmm.
oh, because I think differently. And so, you tend to want to gather with people who think and talk and walk and look and smell and act like you. But I would strongly suggest, diversifying yourself if you can. Listen to different stories. I think listening to different testimonies of people, and I'm not talking about things that want to get into like huge political topics, but just real people, real story, real experiences, because my girlfriends who have known me since childhood, when I let them know that I wanted to move to Georgia, because that's, I have family down there, and they're like, oh, you wouldn't fit in Georgia. And it's "Er," like, wait, I live in an area where there's only 2% black people, and I have nobody around me except for my own family who's black. How do you get to the point of me not fitting in Georgia? And I hear this all the time from
Mm.
anybody that I hear. Anybody that finds out that I have a desire to move south, they're like, you won't fit in. And I think that's very interesting, because I am usually the only black person at a church on a Sunday, the only black person in Safeway at the time of day. Like, I'm the only black person around. So it's just, when I explain to them, um, imagine yourself. You walk into the grocery store, you're the only white person in the whole grocery store. You go to the DMV, you're the only white person. You go to the hospital, your doctor, your nurses, the staff, every patient besides you is black. You are the only white person. Imagine what kind of world that is and what that would do to your perspective of how you're seen. That's the world I live in. That's the world my daughter lives in. And so just having more conversations, I think, opens understandings. And it doesn't have to be a fight. Just
Yeah.
be a good human and ask people about their experience and their stories.
Yeah. And I think this kind of brings us full circle then back to being able to see, because we've talked in one sense sort of globally, like in these people groups and the idea of racism and sexual brokenness, but this kind of brings us back to full circle to say, you're what I'm hearing you say is we need to remember that we're seeing each person as an individual person made in the image of God. Therefore, there's a unique story, but there's also meaning there's a unique value and dignity to each one of those people. As we kind of wrap up our time together here in the last few minutes, just anything else that you would want to share on this topic that you feel like our audience needs to hear? And then what are some resources that you would point us to in terms of being able to kind of continue on this journey of healing in this respect?
Yeah. I think um I think the biggest thing I can say to encourage listeners is, if you are somebody who has a story, start sharing it.
Mm.
Just if you feel like there's an opportunity, I wouldn't let fear hold you back. If you're somebody who maybe doesn't have this experience and you want to learn more, um, ask questions and do your own research, and just be an open door to listening to people, because you can really sense when somebody is on the defense with you as soon as you bring anything up that has to do with racism, or if there's somebody who's open and invites conversation, like, tell me more about that experience, I'm really curious to hear what you went through. There's an openness to it versus, well, there's always two sides to the story,
Mm.
or these comments. And so think about how you're feeling, and if you're feeling triggered, ask yourself, why am I feeling triggered? Why am I feeling defensive as a white person who's never experienced racism? What is it in me that's causing me to feel upset or defensive about this topic? And then same on the other side. So just engaging in relationships and being willing to learn, I think those little baby steps are going to open up some doors, because people are hungry just to feel heard and feel connected and to feel understood. We don't have to have all the answers. We just need to be a good friend, a good listener. And then one of my favorite resources, I've already referenced it, is Latasha Morrison's "Be the Bridge." There's a book. She has teachings, podcasts. The book you can use as a small group study. White and black people can do it in the church together, and just start creating these conversations in your community or in your church.
And then, of course, if people want to learn more about Pure Desire, they can just go to puredesire.org. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes. They can definitely go to puredesire.org. And with our materials, we get to the bottom of any kind of pain and trauma. So whether it's racism or abuse or whatever drove you to the place you are now, all are welcome to come and process that.
Yeah. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to share your story and to be brave in doing that, because I can only imagine that takes an amount of courage that is
Yeah.
that would be unfamiliar to me. And so I want to thank you for that, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for creating this space for me to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah. Well, listeners, we're going to put those resources for Pure Desire and Be the Bridge. We're going to put all that in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. And as Ashley said before, if you are needing to kind of cross that line of sharing your story, we'd love for you to reach out to us. We want to be able to hear your story, help you take your next best step in pursuing a life of integrity and wholeness. So please reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.